Good morning, everyone. This is Ben Weisner, your host for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us this morning for Back to School with Read Live, Getting Students Started. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. Part 1, which focused on tasks that administrators and staff members need to perform for student record keeping and setup activities at the beginning of the school year, was held last week. A recording of that presentation is now up on our website. This morning, your presenter is Claire Hayes. Claire has been involved with Read Naturally since its development. She consults with educators nationwide to discuss reading, fluency, and the Read Naturally strategy. Claire loves working with teachers to help them maximize the benefits of the various Read Naturally interventions. Claire's presentation will include time for Q&A today, so please go ahead and ask any questions you may have using the questions tool in your meeting panel, and she'll respond to questions at the end of her presentation. We'll make an effort to get back to as many of you as possible in the coming days with email responses to questions we may not be able to address today. You should have all received a link to the handout for today's meeting. The handout is also available from the meeting panel if you'd like to download and print it out now. Many of you have also asked about a recording of this webinar. We'll be sending out follow-up emails with links to the recording in about 24 hours, so please look for that in your inbox. Feel free to share the recording with anyone at your school or district who you think would benefit from this valuable information. Again, this webinar is Back to School with Read Live, Getting Students Started. We'll be offering other webinars throughout the school year. If you haven't already done so, you'll want to register for upcoming webinars on the Read Naturally website. Even if you can't make it to our live events, just by registering, you'll be able to receive links to the recordings, and we'll post those on our website as well. Finally, if you're having technical difficulties, please contact GoToWebinar Support. Their phone number is listed at the bottom of the meeting panel. And now, without further delay, I'm going to pass the microphone off to Claire Hayes, your presenter for today's Read Naturally webinar.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to all of you who are out there tuned in today. I know this time of year is absolutely crazy for teachers, and so the fact that you're here today to get some more information about this program to help your students really says a lot about you. So thank you very much for being here today. As many of you probably realize, Read Live is a program that has multiple programs within it. And so today we're going to talk about those different programs, some of the different features within them. We'll go through placement, we'll go through adding the students and allowing access within the staff module. But first, we're going to spend just a few minutes in a PowerPoint presentation. You know Read Naturally Live as our flagship program. It's a fluency and comprehension building program, and it works with 1st through 8th grade reading levels. You may also know that we have a program within Read Live called Word Warm-Ups Live, right? And that is a phonics and decoding program. It builds automaticity through phonics instruction. We also have a program in there called 1 Minute Reader Live, which is actually not an intervention. It's actually an independent reading program. It's great for your intervention kids as independent work, but it's also good for mainstream students who could use a little structure and guidance during their independent reading time. And then finally, Read Naturally Live Español is the Spanish version of Read Naturally Live. So the first thing you have to think about as a teacher getting back to school is which program is right? Some of your students may only need one of these programs. Others might be appropriate to have all 4. One license for one student allows them access to all of these programs. So let's first look at Read Naturally Live. That focus is fluency and comprehension. It goes from 1st through 8th grade reading level, but we do have a Phonics Series. The Phonics Series is at the early levels, so early 1st through late 2nd to early 3rd grade level is where our Phonics Series is. We also have a Spanish read-along that's optional, and of course it's an intervention. So the teacher does need to be with the student at least 1 step, possibly 2. So sometimes when we look at Word Warm-Ups, which is a phonics building program, people often ask, Well, when would I use warm-ups and when would I use Read Naturally Phonics Series? It's a great question. We're going to address it a couple times during this presentation, but I'm going to start here by saying this. Read Naturally Live, the phonics levels are written at early grade levels. Most likely, your students who are in first or second grade and maybe early third grade, their phonics needs and their fluency needs are often very close together. Okay, and so they can typically use Read Naturally Live Phonics Series because they're reading maybe at a mid first grade level and they need to work on long vowels and it all lines up nicely. But we know that as students get older, their differences and the different skill sets within reading vary more greatly. So if you have a student who's reading above a third grade level, but has early phonics needs, and we know there's many in that group, those kids can address their specific phonics need within Word Warm-Ups Live, but work in as high a level as possible with Read Naturally Live. So their fluency and comprehension level is higher than their earliest phonics need. And this with Word Warm-Ups Live, you can approach each student exactly where that student is from each different skill set. So it's just another way to further differentiate. And we're going to cover that again when we get into placement. But now when I look at 1 Minute Reader Live, the main difference there is it's an independent program. So this is not used during intervention time, but rather when students don't have access to a teacher, maybe independent work at school, maybe homework. And then Read Naturally Live Español is our Spanish version of Read Naturally Live. So it's often used in bilingual settings in order to teach a student to read in Spanish. Another thing you have to think about when you're preparing for your school year is scheduling the program, right? Of course, number one is your school schedule, and oftentimes we don't get much say over that. So if you have to alter this slightly based on what you are allowed, of the time you are allotted, that is a very common issue for many teachers. But what Read Naturally recommends for Read Naturally Live is 30 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week. If you can do 45 minutes, awesome. More than 45 minutes tends to be a little much because it's quite an intense intervention. I just got a question this morning about, well, what if I only have 20 minutes? That's fine, especially if you can do it for every day of school, okay? Word Warm-Ups Live is a little bit more flexible in that sometimes people will do it for brief periods of time. So maybe as a warm-up activity for just 10 minutes. But if the student has a lot of phonics work to do, it could be your whole intervention time. Okay, so again, it's just going to depend on the needs of the student. And then 1 Minute Reader Live, that can be used anytime a student needs to be reading independently and isn't in an intervention. The common question I get with that is, well, is the content different from Read Naturally Live? Absolutely. So students working in the intervention will not have duplicate content in the independent program. So it will all be new to them. So what is available within Read Naturally Live are a few different series. We call them the Sequence Series, the Phonics Series, and the Idiom Series. If you notice down here in this other table, it tells you which phonics pattern is taught at which phonics level. As you probably would guess, the first level teaches short vowels, then long vowels, and so forth. So when you have a student who is reading at a second grade level, and needs to work on blends and digraphs, you can address that within Read Naturally Live Phonics Series level 1.8. But when you have a student who's reading at these higher levels and struggles with blends and digraphs, that's when you use Word Warm-Ups Live. Okay, and again, we'll talk about that again when we get into placement. With the sequence series, one of the nice features about that is our keywords step is a vocabulary step. So it's an extra step to work on understanding the meaning of words. We also have an optional Spanish read along within our sequence series. So students who are learning to read in English but could benefit from some background knowledge in Spanish can have that turned on. Our phonics series, the keyword step is not about definitions. It's about phonics. So the students actually get direct instruction of the phonics pattern that the story is dedicated to. So the one you see on your screen is a story about a lake. It's a long A, silent E pattern, right? There's also a spelling activity and a word list that's part of the phonics series. So they're getting a number of different places in which they're getting some direct instruction and direct practice on phonics patterns. Our Idioms series, I'm sure you guessed, focuses on idioms. It was created with the intention of maybe being some particularly helpful for people who are new to the country. But the reality is a lot of kids struggle with understanding idioms. And so it is kind of a fun series that's available. Placement within our programs is built in, it's within the program. You can access the resources needed to place your students. Within Read Naturally Live, you're going to determine which level is appropriate. You're going to select a series and you're going to set a goal. Okay, I'm going to walk you through that process. So you're going to get to see what it looks like actually in the program, and we'll walk through it together. What's happening behind the scenes is there is a placement table, and the computer knows if the student reads within this range, then that may be an appropriate level for them. If they don't, it's going to give a recommendation. Okay, the goal is also recommended by the computer based on how they do on the placement, but you as the teacher will be there with the student. So you will get to decide whether or not you agree with the computer. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute when we actually go through the placement process. Read Naturally Live Español is available from first grade reading level up through mid fourth grade reading level. The keywords is a vocabulary like the sequence series. And our placement within Read Naturally Live Español is that you estimate the student's reading level. I will demonstrate it for you when we get into that piece. But there is a component of seeing how they do on their quiz after the first couple of stories that is part of the Español version. And so again, I'll show you that when we get there. When talking about word warm-ups live, we always have to also talk a little bit about Read Naturally Live, right? Because they're so tied with that Phonics series. So as I mentioned, when you have a student who's reading at a second grade level and their earliest phonics needs is blends and digraphs, well, lucky you. All you have to do is have the student working in Read Naturally Live Phonics series, and they can take care of fluency, phonics, comprehension, all in the same place. But let's say you have an older student, maybe a fifth grader, who's reading at a fourth grade level. But that fifth grader is still struggling with blends and digraphs. That's common. One of the reasons he's stuck at this level is because he hasn't mastered some of those early phonics skills. So you can't ignore it, right? But you also can't put him back in a second grade level when he can handle a fourth grade level. You want him to get exposure to the highest level concepts. You want him to have the biggest, most sophisticated words that he could handle so that you can stretch him and help him progress as much as possible. So that is when you use Word Warm-Ups Live. So as you can see, the arrow here is if you get to a level that is above where the phonics levels are and doesn't line up with the skill set taught, that is when you use Word Warm-Ups Live for the phonics and Read Naturally Live for the fluency and comprehension. As Word Warm-Ups Live sits right now, there is only level 1, okay? But Labor Day weekend, we plan to release level 2. That is our estimate release date. So in September, level 2 will be available to you. Level 2 is 2-syllable words. As soon as it's in there, it will be within your program. You do not have to add anything, pay for anything extra. It will just be in there. So when you have students who have phonics needs that are past 1-syllable words and into 2-syllable words, Word Warm-Ups 2 will be appropriate for you. And hopefully by the time your kids start actually implementing the program, by next month, that will be available for you and your students to use. In order to use any of our programs, students need a license. You need to give them access. I'm going to show you how to do that. You need to assess the students, figure out what is the right spot for them. I'm going to show you how to do that too. You can make adjustments to assignments, goals, and options. And I will walk you through that process as well. And then finally, you need to teach the student steps. And we have that all prepared for you. And so I will send you a direct link to where that happens. With 1 Minute Reader Live, that starts in early first grade and goes through mid fifth grade reading level. It is intended to be an independent reading program. So it's for any student who would benefit from structured independent reading. We all know that our students don't all qualify for intervention, and some of them aren't going to disappear for 3 hours with a book about Harry Potter, right? There's a whole bunch of kids in that group that are reading at grade level, but they're not disappearing forever with books. And those students often need a little more structure and guidance during that independent reading time. And so 1 Minute Reader Live is ideal for that. Students work without direct teacher involvement. Read Naturally Live is the intervention fluency and comprehension program, and so they do need the teacher to be with them. They can use one or both. So mainstream students might only use 1 Minute Reader Live, intervention students might just use Read Naturally Live, or they may use both. Now, one fun, helpful tip I will give you has to do with when you are assigning 1 Minute Reader Live. Because each program requires placement, I'm sure you guessed that you are going to have one-on-one time with your students who will be in these interventions, right? Students who need to be placed in Read Naturally Live or 1 Minute Reader Live are going to need to work with you independently. It takes somewhere, depending on how many programs you're assessing them for, it takes about 5 to 15 minutes per student. A great activity for your students to do while you're assessing their peers is 1 Minute Reader Live. So oftentimes I recommend to teachers, give all your students a license to 1 Minute Reader Live. They can start working in that while you start assessing them all. And then they have something that is structured and guided and providing them with a motivating reading opportunity, but you aren't needed. So you have time to do those assessments. You don't have to do that. If you have other seat work, or if you have an aide or a para that can help you, then you may not want to do that. But it is a nice option for those of you who are looking for something for your students to do while you're doing that assessment. Finally, there's the training your students to work in Read Live. Training students in something that you know very well is somewhat easier than training students in something that is new to you. So especially for those of you who are new to Read Live, we have student training videos that teach students how to do every step in all 4 of the programs within Read Live. So you can send students through these videos that will teach them how to do each step a small amount at a time. Then they can log into their account and do those steps. I recommend getting students placed before you train them. The reason I recommend that is you can see, for example, in this Read Naturally Live student placement video series, there's 4 parts. I like to have the student already placed, because then after watching part 1, where they learn how to log in, how to select a story, how to do the first couple steps, they watch this first video, and then they can log into their Read Alive account and do those first couple steps. So they can solidify and firm up what they just learned in the video. Then they can watch the second video and log into their account and do those next set of steps. So it's a nice way to do it. If you cannot get them placed before you need to train them, it's okay. They're still going to learn. But that is what I have found to be a more effective way, is if you're able to allow them to apply the knowledge immediately after viewing that video. Now we have a resource on our website. Of course, it's called the Read Live Help page. There's tons of information in there. There's how-to videos on how to do everything I'm going to talk about today, everything Ben talked about last week, and probably everything we're going to talk about in the week to come. There's lots of information in there, so please check that out. We have written information, video information. We have instructions that show the picture, so you can see what the mouse is clicking on. We have free webinars and training opportunities on that site, so please look at that. Now we're going to be wrapping up the PowerPoint presentation of this session, so we're going to get to actually walk into Read Live. And when we are in there, I am going to show you how to assign access and do placement for Read Naturally Live, for Word Warm-Ups Live, for 1 Minute Reader Live, and for Read Naturally Live Español. Okay. So we will leave this PowerPoint now, and I'm going to actually enter the actual program. As you can see now on my screen, you see the Read Live URL. Before I go into the account, I am going to show you how to get to the student training videos, okay? So on readnaturally.com website, if you go to our company website, you can access our 4 or 5, 6, there's 6 different bolded headers. So you see them across the top. The third one is titled Training. So that would logically be where you might find training for yourself. It's also where you might find training for students. So most of the things under that training tab are teacher training opportunities, whether it be an online course or recorded webinars or how-to videos. Those are where you find opportunities for you to be trained. Midway down, there is the student training videos. As you can see, when I hover over that, the 4 different sets of videos appear. So if I click on student training videos, I'm brought to a landing page that provides me with a link to each of the sets of videos. Okay, so here we have Read Naturally Live, Word Warm-Ups Live, and so forth. So you can access these, your students can access these from any computer by going to readnaturally.com, hovering over training, and going down to student training videos. All right, so now that we've covered that, we'll go ahead and log in as a teacher to the staff member module. So now that I'm logging in, I clicked on the staff member module. I think I had a typo there, so I'm going to go back and click login. And now I am on this orientation page. So as you probably realize, under the orientation and resources page, there are instructions on how to do things. It tells you the steps that you need to complete in order to get started. And underneath the step, it takes you to a link that will bring you to the place where you can accomplish that task. So the link under Add Students will bring you to the place where you can add your students. And the link under Place Your Students will bring you to the place where you can place your students. We also have a link to that help page where you can find those student training videos, how-to videos for yourself, and all sorts of other resources. But we're going to spend the rest of our session today within the account on the home page. When you log in as a teacher on the home page, you're going to notice that there's a number of tiles that are displayed for you. These rectangles that we see, we call tiles. Every tile has bullets under it that tells you what you can do within that tile. So as you might imagine, if you have a new student who has come to the program, the first thing you have to do is get them into your account, right? So the first item listed under student setup says add and edit your students. So you can click on that student setup button. We have only one button in there that is to add students. So when you click there, you're brought to a place that allows you to add your student. You only have to complete fields that have an asterisk by them. So there's no asterisk in front of this, so you don't have to complete it. There's an asterisk here, so you need to fill it in. After you assign them information, then you can make sure to license the student. If you are adding a student manually, it is probably because you plan for them to use the program. So you do have to say, yes, I want to license the student, okay? You will select yourself as the lead teacher most likely, and now you are brought to the question of which programs you want them to access. You probably do not know for all your students yet because you haven't done placement, you're just putting them in the program. So for the most part, teachers may leave these blank at this point. There's another spot that I will show you where you can add access to these other programs. Okay, so this is not the only place you can grant them access. As soon as you select the checkbox next to these programs, when a student logs into their account, they can then access those programs. So if I have a student who is maybe, let's say, a 8th grader reading at a 6th grade level and has no issues with phonics, I'm not going to want him to have access to word warm-ups because, as we know, if you give students access to something that we don't want them to spend time on, that's where they will want to spend time. So they will be able to log in there as soon as you check that box. So don't check it unless you know for sure that you want to have access to it. The one that you may check right away, that you're most likely to check right away, might be this 1-minute reader access if you plan to have them do that during your assessment time. So if you're going to have them work in Read Live, the 1-minute reader live program within Read Live, while you are assessing them for the other programs, then you will want to check this at that point, okay? So when you click Save and Close or Save and Add Another, and now your student will be in there for you, all right? Once your students have been added, we are going to go back to the home page where we see all of our tiles. The first thing I always need to know is what is my student's earliest phonics need. If I know my student doesn't have any real phonics issues, I'm going to go directly to Read Naturally Live placement because I know I don't need to work on phonics with this student, okay? But for a lot of our students, we know that there are some early phonics needs. And I need to know what their earliest phonics need is before I can place them in Read Naturally Live. Because I need to know, do I want them to work in Read Naturally Live's Phonics series, or do I want them to work in in Word Warm-Ups Live, okay? So if we click on the Word Warm-Ups Live tile, the first button you see up here says Print Phonics Assessment. All right, so I'm going to click on that and a new tab opens up on my browser. Notice, I have not lost my place within Read Live Staff Module. Okay, I'm still here on this tab. I've just opened a new one. The first couple pages of this guide explains to you what I have just explained to you about when you might use Read Naturally Live Phonics series and when you might use Word Warm-Ups Live, okay? So that's what you are seeing on these first couple pages. If I scroll down, you will see that there is a phonics assessment scoring sheet, okay? You're going to make a copy of this for every student that you're going to assess in these phonics skills. Starts with letter sounds, section A, and then as I'm sure you would guess, we go into short vowels, and long vowels, and so forth. As the students read from their student copy, you will mark whether or not the student read it correctly or totally read it wrong, so an error. If they had a slowly decoding word or a self-correction. And based on how many errors or self-corrections they have, the guide will tell you, you need to have the student work in this section. So let's say I take my student through this process and I realize that my student needs to work both on consonant digraphs and consonant blends. Okay, that's the place where I realize my student struggles there. Okay, so now I know that information. My test student, we'll call her, test student needs to work on consonant digraphs and consonant blends. So when I go back to Word Warm-Ups Live, I am actually going to want to exit out of here because I'm going to want to see if the student can work on those things within Read Naturally Live, okay? I can from in here grant access to Word Warm-Ups Live, but I'm not going to do that yet because I want to see if she can use the Phonics series in Read Naturally Live to address blends and digraphs, or will I need to have her working in both programs? So I'm going to hold off on that for right now, and I'm going to go back to the home screen. Now I'm going to go over to the Read Naturally Live tile and click on that. Notice the first item on the bullet list says place my licensed students. So that's what I can do, one of the things I can do within this tile. As you can see, I have a list of my students here. The placement button is over to the right. There's a toolbar at the bottom. So if you can't see all the buttons and fields, try to remember about that toolbar. This placement button is what you click on when your student is sitting next to you to do placement, okay? So when you have a student, you will select the student's name, click the place button next to their name. Now I have the instructions on how to do it written up here, okay? And what I am going to do is decide first, which level do I think she's reading at? I'm making an estimate. But I've already figured out what test students' earliest phonics need is, haven't I? And what did I find out? It was blends and digraphs. So I'm going to see where I can find the series that focuses on, or the level from the phonics series that focuses on blends and digraphs. When I click on the I, it presents me with the list of levels that are at this readability level. Okay, so at early first grade reading level, I have the Sequence Series 1.0. I also have the Phonics Series short vowels. At the mid first grade reading level, I have the Sequence Series 1.5. I also have Phonics Series long vowels. When I get down to the level 2, so early second grade reading level, that's where blends and digraphs appears. So with this student, I am going to start to see if she can work on blends and digraphs within Read Naturally Live. So she's going to be sitting next to me and she's going to read this passage to me. As she's reading, I'm keeping track of how many errors she has, and I will put the number of missed words into this box. Okay. If we figure out that this is the right level for her, that will tell me I don't need Word Warm-Ups Live because she can work on blends and digraphs in Read Naturally Live. If this level ends up being too easy, then I'm going to need to move on to a higher level, and I will ultimately end up wanting her to work in Word Warm-Ups Live to work on blends and digraphs. Now, during this time, you might have your students who are in your group working on 1 Minute Reader Live, because that's an independent program, or they could be doing something else too. But as you're going through this placement process and counting her errors, you're just trying to decide if this is the right fit for the student and how many words correct per minute they're able to read. So we enter the number of errors the student have. We click the last word that the student attempted. Then it says we enter the number of missed words and we click next. Now look, at level 2.0, my test student read 75 words correct per minute. I want her to read between 30 and 60 in order for this to be the right level. Okay. So I wanted to read a lot of words, right? But for me to know that this is the right level, I want her in this placement range. She is not. She's quite a bit outside of this placement range. So the computer is recommending that I click next to test the student again and to try 2.5. It's suggesting 2.5 because I'm outside the range on the high end. If I was outside the range on the low end, it would recommend that I test at 1.5, right? Okay, so now when I click next, I can select another level. What do I know at this point though? Now that I know my test student can't work in blends and digraphs within Read Naturally Live, I know she's also going to need to use Word Warm-Ups Live, okay? So I'll give her test level 2.5 and see if she fits in here. She may not. We might have to go all the way up to 3.0. Which is why the amount of time it takes to place students in Read Naturally Live varies. Sometimes you'll hit the nail on the head the first time and the student will place right in the level that you estimated. Just a 1 minute timing, a minute or so of chatting with the student, and it might just take 2 or 3 minutes. Other students, you may need 3 passages, so they might take 6 minutes to get through the placement. Our placement puts students in a level that is above their instructional level. Okay, not because our levels are named wrong, they're named properly. 2.5 is mid-second. But we put them in a level that's above their instructional level because they get a ton of support. They read along with audio support, they practice over and over again, so they can actually function at a higher level than they could without the support of the program. So if your student is in a level that you think, oh, that seems a little high for him, it's probably right. Now we click the last word, enter the errors, we click next, and now the student has placed within the 30 to 60. So the computer is recommending that we stop testing and pick a level. Because I'm going to work in blends and digraphs and word warm-ups, I'm not going to work in the Phonics Series and Read Naturally Live. I'm going to put her in level 2.5. When I click next, a pop-up box appears. It's not telling you you made a mistake. It's telling you or asking you, are you sure this is what you want? It's just confirming what you have selected. So you have selected the Sequence Series level 2.5 with a goal of 80. So the last point to make in here is, what is that goal? Where did it come from? It is not a long-term fluency goal. It is not a cold timing goal. What it is a hot timing goal. It's the pass goal. So in order for students to pass a story, they have to be able to read 80 words correctly in a minute for the teacher. Okay, so they also have to do other things like be accurate and have some expression. But from a words correct per minute point, that number is their goal. It will be adjusted as students work through the program. But now we can see that the student is put in level 2.5 with a goal of 80. If I need to make a change to that, I can click this edit button and adjust it as I see fit when needed. But now that I know I can't work on blends and digraphs, I have to go back to word warm-ups, don't I? Because my student is going to need to have access to word warm-ups, and she currently doesn't. So what I'm going to do is select her name, and then I'm going to click the button that says Add Word Warm-Ups Access. I tried to get her to do phonics and Read Naturally Live, but it didn't work out. And I want to meet her exactly where she is in every part of her reading. So I'm going to click Add Word Warm-Ups Access. This pop-up box just says, are you sure you want to give the student access to word warm-ups? Yes, I am sure. And now my student has access to word warm-ups. She is automatically put in section B of short vowel. That's not going to be right for the majority of your students. You will often have to click this edit button and adjust it to be the section that is appropriate for your student. So in this case, my test student, we found out that she struggled with digraphs and blends. So I'm going to put her in consonant digraphs. The goal is automatically defaulted at 40. That will be right for most of your students, especially younger ones. If you're working with older students, you may need to adjust that up to 50, and you'll just kind of see how that goes. Notice that there's a level section and a drop-down box that only has one thing. Well, after we release level 2, that drop-down box will have 2-syllable words. And then sometime in 2022, we will have 3-syllable words or multisyllabic. There's more than 3-syllable words in some of those. So level 1 is 1 syllable, 2 is 2-syllable, and level 3 that will be coming sometime at the end of the school year is multisyllabic. So when you click Save and Close, now that student has been put in consonants digraphs with a goal of 40. So the last thing I want to show you has to do with 1 Minute Reader. 1 Minute Reader Live might be something that you do first. You might have granted all of those students access to it when you added them. Remember, through the student setup? When you add a student, you can select 1 Minute Reader or these other things. And if you decided you're going to have them do that independently while you assess kids, you might select that for everybody. When students log into 1 Minute Reader Live for the first time, it will ask them if they want to take a placement test, and they can do that by themselves. But you may want to have a little bit more control over what they're able to read. So if you go under the 1 Minute Reader Live tab, and you select a student's name, you can add or remove access to 1 Minute Reader. But when you click the Change Story Options for Selected button, you can turn off access to certain levels. So for example, let's say you have a 5th grader that you think is reading at about a 3rd grade level. You might decide you don't want him to be able to access these real easy levels. You want him to be working, at least a level 2 or higher. Our levels in 1 Minute Reader are labeled for mid. So 2 is mid-second, 3 is mid-third, mid-4th, and mid-5th. Okay, so you can turn on or off different levels. You can also make adjustments to the steps in which they go through. But that'll be totally up to you on how you want to adjust that. But this way, when the student logs in for the first time, they will only have access to the levels that you think are most applicable. Now, if you do nothing, they can select whatever level they want. If they take themselves through placement, the computer will make a recommendation based off of what the student said was the last word they read. Right? And that may or may not be 100% accurate, but it's okay. They're going to get to read along with audio support. They'll get to practice reading and see their progress. They'll have some comprehension questions. So it's a highly engaging independent reading program that will be a great wait activity until it's their turn to get assessed by you. So today what we've gone through, what I've showed you, is how to add your students, how to grant them access to the various programs, what levels and series are available at each of the programs, and how to do placement within them. We also have webinars that are coming up that will have to do with things that you will need to do after this. Data analysis, checking initial placement, implementation, those sorts of things. So please look for those. But I do have about 5 minutes left in the presentation today. So I don't know, Ben, if there were some questions that came through that we may have time to answer at this point.
There were a few, Claire. One that came up a couple of times is whether all the programs that you've talked about come with the program, come with Read Live, or do people have to purchase them separately?
Great question, and I have great news. It's all part of the program. So we actually, over the last 18 months or so, have been adding a lot of new content into Read Live. We have not charged more for it. As soon as it's available, it's just in the program for you. So you don't have to pay for Word Warm-Ups access. It's in there if you have an account. So thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm. Another question was regarding training students. When training students, do Do teachers train them individually, or is it possible to train them as a group, as a class?
It is absolutely possible to train them as a class. So, and you can do it any way you want. So here are kind of the two most common scenarios you might find. Once a student has been placed, you can say, okay, go back to your desk, go to this URL address, and I want you to watch a video and then do the steps you were just taught within the program, right? Because the first video is going to teach them how to log in and how to do these first couple steps. So they can do it one at a time. So right as soon as they're done being placed, you can put them back on their computer and have them go through the training on their own and implement the steps. After they watch one video, they go to the next video, implement the steps and so forth. So they can do it individually as soon as you have them placed. Another way to do it is as a group, and you can do that two different ways too. So one way is to, of course, display the video, right? You would play this first video to the whole group, then everybody could log in and do it on their own. So you would have to wait until all of your students are placed in order to do it that way. Or you could do a lesson plan that we have. So we do have a written lesson plan where you have everybody goes through all the steps together as one unit. And so that with that lesson plan, you're doing more of logging into the account, everybody's logging into their own account, going through the steps, and you're all doing it as a unit. So the first story that everybody completes would be as a group through that lesson plan. So that is an option if you don't want the videos. So you can do the actual written lesson plan where you go through it as a group. You can group train through the videos, or you can individually train through the videos.
Okay, and then we'll take one final question. This is a question that comes up periodically. For those students that used Read Naturally Live last year, do they need to be replaced, or would they pick up where they left off?
Excellent question. I should have mentioned that in that. Thank you for asking that. We don't recommend replacement. We recommend leaving them where they are. So if you have a student that, you know, when the school ended in June, they left and they were on level 2.5 with a goal of 80. When they come back in September, they can pick up right where they left off. Some of them might have a little bit of a hard time reaching that goal of 80. So if you need to bump it down, remember you can do that right from the program, right? Remember the teacher button that has the apple on it? If you see on a cold score, the student read 30 words and their goal is 80, you can log in right at that moment and drop it down. But most likely, after the first story or two, they will be right back right where they left off. They don't take very long to pick back up. And we don't want to replace them. We just want them to continue on. And again, it might be slightly more challenging than it was in the spring for the first couple stories, but they should, you know, they might have to practice once or twice more in order to reach that goal, but that is what we want them to do anyway. So no harm done that way, so long as they feel that they can still be successful. So great question. So leave them as they were and let them pick up where they left off.
Great, thanks. So we're going to wrap up here. There were several questions that Claire will follow up with you all after the presentation is over via email. Thanks everyone for your participation, and thank you, Claire. Another reminder that we'll be sending out follow-up emails with links to the recording in about 24 hours. So please look for that in your inbox. Feel free to share the recording with anyone at your school or district. Also, if you could, please respond to the survey that will appear on your screen as you exit the webinar so we can continue to improve this educational experience for all of you in the future. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks again, Claire, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye.